Hi, I'm Marlena. Last week, my sister looked me straight in the eye and said, "Why don't you just disappear?" And my mother? She agreed. So I left. Quietly. No shouting, no scene, just silence. This morning, they called me 13 times. But long before that moment, they'd already started cutting me out of family photos, out of public speeches, out of my own memories. They erased me like I was an inconvenience. What happens when your own blood rewrites your story without you? And more importantly, what do you do when you decide to write it back? Dinner had been quiet, but not peaceful. Vera had spent most of it pushing food around her plate, tapping her fork against the dish like she was waiting for a cue only she could hear. Clara sat across from me, glass of wine in hand, eyes drifting toward the television that wasn't even on. The roast was lukewarm, the salad untouched. No one had said much. That should have warned me something was coming. It did. Vera set her fork down with a sharp clink. "Why don't you just disappear?" I blinked. My brain didn't quite catch up with my ears at first. She said it casually, like ordering a refill. No heat, no sarcasm. Just a flat suggestion to vanish. Before I could respond, before I even found breath, Clara looked up from her wine and added, "Maybe we'd all be better off." And there it was. The sentence that erased me. I didn't yell, didn't cry, didn't ask why. I just stared at both of them and realized, for the first time in my adult life, that they meant it. They weren't trying to hurt me. They were just tired of pretending I belonged at that table. I've learned a few things about my family over the years. 1. Whoever talks louder wins. 2. Silence, when wielded right, can last longer than any scream. So I said nothing. Instead, I stood up, excused myself without being asked, and climbed the stairs to what used to be my room. It had changed. The posters were gone. Half my books were in boxes I didn't pack. A stack of folded linens sat where my nightstand had been, like someone had already begun the process of converting it into a guest room. I didn't linger. I pulled out the old canvas bag I kept under my bed, tossed in my laptop, a few chargers, a change of clothes, and one photo May and Dad, standing in front of the cabin in Sisters, Oregon, the day we brought home that ridiculous carved moose statue Clara hated. His arm around my shoulder, my smile real. We both looked like we belonged somewhere. By the time I reached the bottom of the stairs, they were still seated. Vera was scrolling on her phone. Clara poured another inch of Merlot. As I reached for my keys, Clara didn't even look up. "You always take things too personally," she said, like it was some medical diagnosis. I held the door a second longer than necessary. "I won't make this mistake again," I told her. It wasn't a threat. It was a vow. No one followed me out. The sky outside was low and heavy, the kind of gray Oregon specialized in this time of year. I didn't even turn on the radio. Just drove, street after street, until the road narrowed and I saw Harper's porch light blinking against the dusk like it was waiting for me. She opened the door before I knocked. Didn't ask anything. Just stepped aside to let me in, like this wasn't the first time I'd come undone at her threshold. We didn't talk much. She made tea, handed me a mug with both hands, and sat beside me in silence. I don't remember if I drank it. Just remember the heat of the ceramic and the hum of the refrigerator. It was close to midnight when I finally said it out loud. She meant it. Mom, too. This time, they both meant it. Harper didn't reply, and I didn't need her to. I turned off my phone that night, but not before the first missed call lit up the screen. Back then, I didn't know it would be 13 by morning. I also didn't know that just a week before it all unraveled, I had nearly convinced myself that maybe things were turning around. It started with Vera's voice at the edge of the hallway. "Mom's doing a charity brunch for the community center next weekend. You want to help coordinate?" I blinked at her, unsure if I'd misheard. "You want me there?" She rolled her eyes. "I didn't say headline it, Arlena, just help." Still, it was the first time in months she asked me to do anything other than move my car. So I said yes. I showed up early, hair done, heels a bit too much for folding chairs and buffet trays, But I wanted to look like someone you didn't forget to mention. That morning, Vera handed me a clipboard like I belonged. I even smiled genuinely, for the first time in longer than it'd admit. Guests arrived in waves: old neighbors, donors, 2 retired teachers from our high school. I greeted people, directed them to seats, smiled until my cheeks ached. One older gentleman, Mr. Headley, approached with a kind grin. "Well, if it isn't Vanessa," he chuckled, patting my arm. I froze. "It's Arlena," I corrected gently. He blinked. "Ah, my mistake. You girls look more and more alike these days." We didn't. Later, I found a stack of printed invitations near the check-in table. The line beneath the event title read, "Hosted by Clara Whitmore and Vera Whitmore and guest." I laughed at first, a dry kind of laugh that stayed in the throat. I told myself it was probably a print error, but it echoed louder than I wanted. Things didn't get better once the speeches began. Vera stood confidently beside Clara, microphone in hand, glowing under soft stage lights. She spoke about legacy, about the importance of roots and community, and then about a memory. "When I was 10, Vera said, I entered the Northwest Young Writers Competition. Dad helped me revise my story, remember, Mom? And when I won, we drove all the way to Portland to accept the award." People clapped. Clara smiled, nodding along. But I couldn't breathe. That wasn't her story. It was mine. I remember the night I stayed up until 2 a.m., asking Dad to read my 5th revision. I remember how Vera didn't care, how she'd rolled her eyes at me hunched over the desk. And I remember Dad whispering, "They'll remember this one, sweetheart." But now they clapped for her. And I sat at the back of the room, watching a piece of my childhood pass hands like it never belonged to me. After the event, I pulled Vera aside in the foyer while people milled around with paper cups of lukewarm coffee. "Why would you tell that story?" I asked quietly. She didn't even blink. "You really think you earned that win? You wouldn't have even finished that story if Mom hadn't begged me to help you clean up the ending." "That's not true." She leaned closer. "Everything you have you owe us. You're just living off what we built." Behind her, Clara hovered nearby, listening. I waited for her to say something. To correct the record, to protect the daughter she always called her quiet one. But Clara turned away, offering a polite nod to someone walking by. That night, I sat in my car outside Harper's place. The windows fogged slightly, though I wasn't cold. I didn't knock, didn't go inside, just stared at myself in the rearview mirror. What if Vera was right? What if none of it had ever been mine? Memories are fragile things. Twist them enough times, and even the person who lived them starts to forget where the truth ends and the lie begins. I drove home before midnight. My apartment was still and dim. I dropped my purse by the door, kicked off my shoes, and stood at the edge of my bedroom. I'd packed a weekend bag, expecting I might stay with Harper after the brunch. I unpacked it, folded everything neatly, slid it back into the closet like it had never moved. Maybe I was being too sensitive, I whispered aloud, though no one was listening. But something deep beneath that sentence already knew this wasn't the first rewrite, and it wouldn't be the last. 3 days before I left, I stepped back into the house I used to call home. Vera had texted that morning, asking for a USB drive with some files from an old project we worked on years ago, something I'd kept because she hadn't. The tone of her message was uncharacteristically polite. I took that as a sign of goodwill. I shouldn't have. The living room smelled like polish and lilacs. Someone had been through here recently, probably a cleaner. Everything looked curated, almost staged. I moved toward the fireplace, glancing at the mantel, and froze. The photo, that same family portrait we'd taken in Yellowstone. Dad had insisted we dress like we weren't miserable cockies, matching shirts, fake laughs. It was staged and awkward, but it was one of the last pictures of all 4 of us together. Except now it was 8. The print over the mantel was a larger version, but something was off. I took a step closer. Vera, center. Clara next to her. Dad on the right, hand resting on Vera's shoulder. The far left, where I remembered standing with my arm looped awkwardly behind Vera's, back gone. Cropped out. The background extended just enough to fill the space where E'd once been. My stomach dipped. I reached for my phone and opened the original in my gallery. I'd saved it years ago in a folder called Things Worth Keeping. I held it up to the framed version. Same date, same outfits, same trees in the background. Just one person missing. Me. I didn't say anything. I just stood there staring at that empty space like it might give me a reason. Upstairs, I heard movement. Laundry being folded, drawers opening and closing. I followed the sound, driven less by curiosity and more by the hollow feeling spreading in my chest. My old room wasn't mine anymore. The paint was the same, but the energy had shifted. Vera stood inside, folding towels. On the back of my old desk chair hung a soft blue satin dress. I knew that fabric. I'd picked it out myself. Dad had it tailored for me for my 28th birthday. "Where'd you find that?" I asked, voice low but steady. She didn't look up. It was in storage. I had it taken in. "You had it?" "What?" "You haven't worn it in years," she said, like that explained everything. "That wasn't yours to alter," I said. The edges of my voice frayed. Vera shrugged. "It's not like he's here to care anymore." That line did more damage than she probably intended, or maybe exactly what she meant it to. Clara appeared in the doorway just then, drying her hands on a kitchen towel. She glanced between us and offered a strained smile. "Tea's on," she said. "Why don't you both come downstairs?" I waited for something else. An acknowledgement. Even a look in my direction that hinted she'd noticed what just happened. Nothing came. Her face was as still as the photo downstairs framed, unmoved, adjusted to fit the narrative. I left without a word. In the driveway, I sat in my car for a long time. The interior was warm from the afternoon sun, but I felt cold. My fingers trembled slightly on the steering wheel. I turned the engine over, then off. Just sat there. "They're not just taking space," I whispered to no one. "They're rewriting the story." I saw Dad's handwriting flash through my memory, his note in the back of my old poetry journal. Memories are how we protect what matters. What happens when the people around you start sanding the edges off your life until even you can't be sure what was ever real? I drove back to my apartment slowly, stopping once for gas I didn't really need. I needed the pause more than the fuel. The silence. That night, I pulled out the old hard drive I hadn't touched in over a year. It clicked to life with a slow hum. I created a new folder and labeled it Proof. I copied photozones with me in them, emails, screenshots, text threads, a voice memo from Dad saved from my 25th birthday. I wasn't planning to use them, not yet. But if they were going to erase me, I wanted to have something that said I'd existed, even if the only person who ever looked at it again was me. 2 days before everything fell apart, I received an envelope in the mail. Heavy stock, embossed lettering Clara's style, of course. Inside was an invitation to the Eugene Historical Society's 50th anniversary gala. The line at the bottom read, "Hosted by Ms. Vera Whitmore and guest." I read it twice. No mention of me. Not the Whitmore family, not even Arlena Whitmore. Just and guest. The implication landed with the same chill I felt opening that front door for a stranger. Still, Harper urged me to go. "Show up," she said. "Look good. Remind them you don't disappear just because they forget to say your name." So I went. The event was held in the downtown Civic Hall. Rows of chairs lined the stage, glass pitchers sweating on long tables. I recognized most of the guest donors, retired teachers, board members who used to call me the sweet one. I stepped in, heels clicking against polished wood, and smiled like I was happy to be there. But even before Vera took the podium, I felt it. She spoke effortlessly, her voice warm and composed, radiating poise the way she always did when there was something at stake. The speech started harmless, acknowledging past board members, community leaders, even Clara. Then came the part that stung. I remember driving across counties with Mom, Vera said, delivering brochures by hand, going door to door, back when we were just starting the foundation. She paused, smiling. Clara beamed in return. That had been my idea, my beat-up Honda. My summer spent mapping routes on sticky notes and running into grocery stores for cold coffee and hand sanitizer. Vera had tagged along on one tripone, and now she'd lived it all? The audience clapped. I sat in the third row, nodding like I agreed with a version of the truth that didn't include me. My hands had started trembling by the time I stood up. I slipped out the side door, past the caterer prepping dessert trays, and into the quiet hallway. I pulled the invitation from my bag and looked at it again. This time, I noticed something I hadn't before. Veronica, Clara, Whitmore, and Guest. They'd even added her middle name, Full Legacy. I folded the card in half and slid it into the trash near the restroom. No drama, just done. But that wasn't the first time something like this had happened. A memory surfaced me at 11, nervously adjusting my shirt at a local library, holding my poem in sweaty fingers. I had won a regional writing contest. I remembered how Dad had grinned the whole way home, how Mom told the neighbors I really had a voice. Weeks later, I overheard Vera on the phone. Yeah, Arlena and I worked on that poem together. I mean, I helped her clean up the rhythm, obviously. Clara had been in the kitchen. She hadn't corrected her. She never did. That's when the doubts began. Not loud, not all at once, but slow, subtle, like rot under paint. Backstage after the event, I found Vera by the refreshment table, sipping lemon water like she just accepted an award. No one else was around. I didn't plan what I said next. I didn't need to. Why do you keep erasing me? She blinked. Jesus, Arlena. Grow up. You took my story again. You stood up there and gave away a memory that wasn't yours. You were always the delicate one, she said, setting her glass down. We couldn't count on you to follow through. You cracked under pressure. I stared at her. That wasn't your call to make. Vera leaned in, voice low. You don't get to rewrite the past just because you want a bigger part in it. No, I said. Steady now. You don't get to rewrite me just because you talked louder. She laughed, that sharp exhale she used when she wanted to dismiss me without getting her hands dirty. Then she walked away. Clara stepped in from the side hallway a moment later, holding a plate of untouched finger sandwiches. She must have heard at least the tail end. Did you hear what she said? I asked. Clara shifted the plate to her other hand. She didn't mean it like that. But you always mean it like that, I said. You mean it with silence. She didn't respond. That was the last time I waited for either of them to offer me a place at their table. I should have known it wasn't a real invitation the second Clara called it a check-in. That's what she always did when she wanted to sound warm, but deliver something cold. Her voice was steady, practiced too careful to be casual. Just come by, she said. It's time we talked through everything. I went the next afternoon around 4. The sky was that typical midwinter gray, flat and unbothered, but there was a weight in the air that hadn't been there before. It followed me up the walkway and settled deep in my chest the moment I stepped onto Clara's porch. Vera's car was already in the driveway, angled in like it belonged more than I did. Of course she was here. Of course they were doing this together. Clara opened the door, all efficiency and coolness. No hug, no smile. Just a tight nod and a wave inward, like I was a courier dropping off forms. Vera was already seated at the dining table, a thick folder laid out in front of her. I didn't even need to see the embossed gold logo to know it was from the family attorney. I'd seen that same font on the documents when Dad died. Clara motioned toward the empty chair across from them. We've made a few updates to the estate plan. It's nothing urgent, just clarifications. I didn't move. I just stood there, still in my coat, letting the silence stretch. Vera pushed the folder across the polished table. It's simpler this way. The properties will be transferred into my name, fewer legal hurdles later. I looked at Clara, searching for some trace of discomfort, maybe even guilt. Is that what this is? A simplification? She avoided my eyes. You'll still receive a cash portion. It's not large, but meaningful. And what about the power of attorney? Clara paused, then gave a diplomatic half-smile. We thought it might be overwhelming. You've had a lot going on lately. There it was. The careful wording, the professional courtesy cloaking the personal decision. I let out a slow breath. Did either of you ask how that would feel? Vera crossed her arms and leaned back. You're too emotional for those decisions, Arlena. That sentence, that exact phrase or some version of it had been thrown at me for years. It always landed the same, sharp, minimizing, permanent. But this time, it came with paperwork. Clara stood and moved to the cabinet along the wall. She opened the top drawer and returned with a small, time-worn envelope, its edges yellowed, the paper soft with age. She placed it on the table between us. I found this while cleaning out the upstairs closet, she said gently. It's the letter you wrote me when you were 19. You tucked in money from your first job. I stared at the handwriting on the front. My own. Clara gave a nostalgic smile, as if this was some heartfelt moment. You don't need to hold on to things like this. It's not necessary. She hadn't even opened it. I reached out slowly, picked up the envelope, and slipped it into my purse. My hand lingered there for a moment, part grief, part resolve. Silence fell over the room, but it wasn't empty. It was dense, humming with things left unsaid. Then something in me shifted. My voice came out low, steady, cold. You've made your choices, I said, and I won't fight you for a seat at a table you already cleared of me. Clara blinked. Don't be dramatic. No one's pushing you out. I looked from one sister to the other. I'm not being dramatic. I'm just done underreacting. I picked up the folder Vera had slid across the table and handed it back to her untouched. I don't need this, I said. Vera let out a frustrated sigh. You always make things harder than they have to be. And yet, I said, slipping my arms into my coat, I'm still the quiet one between us. Neither of them moved. Neither of them said goodbye. I walked out with a steadiness I hadn't felt in years, a kind of deliberate calm, like every step was another nail in a coffin that should have been sealed a long time ago. And this time, I didn't glance back. Once inside my car, I sat with the engine off and my keys in hand. The hedge beside the driveway caught my eye, the same one I used to hide in as a child when I needed space to cry. Or to dream. I used to imagine it was a secret passage to a better life. Maybe, in some way, it still was. I pulled out my phone and dialed Harper. She picked up on the second ring. Hey, you okay? I stared at the unopened envelope on the seat beside me. My younger self, folded into paper. I need your help, I said. With what? I'm going to start collecting everything. Photos, emails, letters, screenshots. Anything that shows I was here, that I counted, that I mattered. There was a pause. To what end? I looked at the steering wheel, then back at the envelope. I thought about everything it swallowed for the sake of peace. Everything I let slide so I wouldn't seem difficult. Emotional. Too much. To remind them I existed, I said quietly. Before I prove it. The morning I left, I wasn't supposed to be awake that early. Sleep had only half worked its magic after the conversation with Clara and Vera. My chest still felt tight, like my ribs had forgotten how to hold anything but hurt. I rolled over, planning to bury myself for another hour, but then came the ping. I wasn't expecting much, probably a newsletter or some spam, but my eyes caught the subject line, Final Edits Approved Tribute Video. It was part of an email thread between Vera and a public relations contractor. I wasn't supposed to be copied. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. The tone was professional, the exchange efficient, but halfway down the thread, it hit. Make sure Arlena's part isn't included in the final cut, Vera had written. We've already aligned the messaging. A reply followed quickly. Understood. Replacing with extended Vera clip. I read it again, then a third time. I should have been furious. I should have thrown the laptop across the room. But I just sat there, frozen. Like my body knew this wasn't news, just confirmation. A silent erasure, handled in plain sight. The tribute video. Clara's milestone birthday. That ridiculous garden party full of lanterns and curated nostalgia. I'd spent hours filming my segment, pulling the curtains just right to catch golden light, repeating takes because my voice kept cracking. I'd even cried once, talking about how she used to read to us under the jacaranda tree, and it never aired. Not because it didn't land. Because Vera had deleted me Agan. By noon, I was at Harper's place. I didn't say much, just showed up with my laptop and the kind of silence that makes good friends wordless. She opened the door, looked at me once, and cleared her dining table without a word. "Check the shared drive," I managed to say, my voice flat. "Vera sent it to me months ago." I never looked. We found it after some digging buried underfolders named Legacy Content and Final Assets. The wheel spun forever, and then it loaded. Family Timeline. Inside was a trash folder, and there it was. Arlena birthday clip final.move. Still intact. Still timestamped. Still me. Harper backed it up like it was national treasure, 2 hard drives, 1 cloud, even a burner email address I'd forgotten ever creating. She turned to me. "What do you want to do with it?" I looked at the file. The name. The version of me they decided didn't fit. "Keep it," I said, "for now." Back home, I didn't unpack. I didn't eat. I didn't scroll away the feeling. Instead, I made space, cleared the clutter from my desk, wiped it down with an old dish towel, and opened a blank folder on my screen. The rewrite. Inside, I began to place the evidence. Not to punish them. Not even to demand anything. Just so that, finally, anyone would see it wasn't all in my head. I added a cropped version of the Yellowstone photo, where it'd been cut off at the shoulder, the birthday invitation, the one where my name was missing, the tribute video, my voice, my memories, my face, screenshots of Vera's email thread with the PR vendor, a scanned PDF of the estate paperwork Clara quietly handed me last fall. The envelope I'd never sent my 19-year-old self's letter to Clara, sealed but unread. I dragged each item into the folder like placing bones in a display case. They had their version. This was mine. I didn't feel angry anymore, not in the fire-breathing way people expect. I was something else. Resolved, unhooked. Harper texted me around 8. "You good?" I stared at it for a while, then typed back, "I'm about to be." I opened a new message window. No salutation, no sign-off. Just 2 attachments. The tribute video, a screenshot of Vera's instruction to erase me. And then I addressed the email not to Vera, not even to Clara, but to the people who mattered most in their world. Clara's nonprofit board, her closest donors, the foundation's media consultant. Subject line, "This was her daughter too." I stared at the send button, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to remember the stillness right before. Then I clicked. No fire, no thunder. Just truth, quiet and final. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the city pulsed taillights, porch lights, apartments blinking on one by one. Life, indifferent but alive. They could keep pretending I was never part of the story. But not this time. This time, I wrote it down. The magazine was everywhere. I hadn't planned to see it. I'd only stopped at the coffee shop for a quick cup before heading home. But there it was. A fresh stack of glossy covers at the register, proudly displayed like some kind of local gospel. Clara and Vera stood side by side on the cover, both in crisp pastels, arms gently linked, smiles carefully measured. "The women behind the legacy," the headline read. I didn't pick it up at first, just stared at the pile like it might catch fire if I looked long enough. Curiosity got the better of me. I opened it with the care you reserve for something that might break you. The feature was glowing. Paragraph after paragraph about their tireless work building the foundation, launching initiatives, nurturing a family legacy of female leadership. I scanned for my name. Nothing. Not even a footnote. And then came the kicker: Vera, quoted as the sole visionary behind the scholarship fund I had drafted, named, and fought to establish when no one else thought it was worth the trouble. I sat down at the nearest table and stared at the page, the steam from my coffee curling upward like it couldn't stand the company either. Within the hour, my phone buzzed with messages. Just saw the article. So proud of your family. Didn't know you stepped back. Must have been hard. And the one that finally made me put the phone face down. Vera really carried things, huh? I texted Harper. I didn't step back. I got shoved. By late afternoon, I was parked outside Clara's place. The sky had shifted into a muted blue, clouds rolling over like they knew what was coming. I walked in without knocking. She was in the sunroom, watering plants. Vera wasn't there. I didn't wait to exchange pleasantries. I made my way to the hallway that once displayed our childhood art back when Clara pretended to be proud of both of us. And then I saw it. The painting I made at 14. Deep navy swirls, flecks of gold, brush strokes I still remembered wrestling into place. Dad used to call it my voice without words. Now, it hung in a polished wooden frame with Vera's name signed neatly in the bottom corner. I stood in front of it, the air gone thin. You knew that was mine, I said quietly. Clara appeared behind me. I thought you wouldn't care. It's been years. I turned to her. So because I stopped asking for space, you assumed I didn't deserve any. She opened her mouth but said nothing. I walked toward the bookshelf, letting my eyes scan for other ghosts. And there they were, 2 awards I'd received in college, now displayed as part of a timeline exhibit Vera had arranged in the hallway. Only her name was listed on the tags. This isn't about memory anymore, I said. It's about intent. Clara didn't look at me. You're not just letting her rewrite everything, I said. You're helping her do it. There was nothing left to salvage in that room. I didn't yell, didn't cry, just took out my phone and snapped a picture of the painting. Then another of the mislabeled awards. That night, I sat in my apartment, lights dimmed, silence thick. I opened a new email, addressed it to the editor of the magazine. No greeting, just attachments. Side-by-side scans of my original scholarship proposal and the published version Vera had submitted months later with subtle edits. But all my structure. The timestamps were clear. The signatures, not hers. I included the painting photo, attached a digital version of the same art from a decade-old hard drive, same name, same brush patterns, with my signature digitally embedded from back then. Subject: you might want to fact-check your front page. I didn't sign it. I didn't have to. By morning, the article was gone from the magazine's website. No correction, no apology. But I knew Clara's inbox was catching heat. Harper forwarded me a screenshot from a board member asking, why wasn't Arlena listed? Another said, can we confirm authorship of the fund language? I didn't need them to respond. I just needed the silence that followed to be theirs for once, not mine. I hadn't planned on checking my phone again that night. After the magazine pulled the article and silence filled the void Vera once used to control every conversation, I'd expected peace. Or at least quiet. But peace is never what it seems when it comes from people who built their comfort on your exclusion. The screen lit up around 10:17 p.m. Vera's name flashed, followed by a single message. Shell spiral. Let her. No one believes her anyway. No greeting. No punctuation. And more importantly, no name. Just she. It wasn't for me. Clearly meant for Clara. But it landed in my inbox anyway. I stared at the message for a long time, unsure if I felt more insulted by the words, or the fact that, even in private, I was never granted the decency of a name. She. Like I was a storm they could watch from a window. Like I didn't live inside the house, too. I didn't respond. Instead, I stepped outside Harper's apartment. The porch light buzzed overhead, casting a faint halo across the sidewalk. I paced the driveway once, twice, trying to keep my breath steady. Harper came out a minute later, arms folded under her hoodie. She sent it to you? She asked, already knowing. Wrong thread, maybe, I muttered. Right target. She waited, giving me space to sort the words I didn't know how to say. They never saw me as part of this family, I finally said. Just someone to contain. To quiet down. Harper didn't interrupt. I'm not going back, I added. Not even for closure, because there's nothing left to close. Later, we sat on her couch, half a mug of lukewarm tea between us. She went digging through an old drawer of tech junk, tossing out chargers and scratched-up thumb drives. Then she found ETA portable hard drive I'd forgotten I gave her years ago when I was clearing out my childhood desk. "I don't know if it still works," she said. It did. The files loaded slowly, but there it was. A folder labeled Letters That Didn't Need Stamps. Inside, a document titled, "For Arlen AF, I Don't Get to Say It." My hands trembled. I double-clicked. It was a draft email from Dad. Never sent, never printed, just saved. It read, "Sweetheart, I don't know when this will reach you, or if it ever should. But I see things. I see how Vera needs control more than closeness. I see how your mother fears friction more than injustice. And I see you. You were always the one who saw things clearly. That made you a threat, even in this house. You are not too much. You are not dramatic. You are feeling what others refuse to. Don't let them convince you otherwise. Don't let them make you forget who you are. You see more because you feel more." I sat there with his words glowing on the screen, my heart stretching to hold the weight of both pain and relief. I printed it. I didn't send it to anyone. Not yet. Instead, I added it to a folder on my laptop titled Not Forgotten, the same place where I'd stored the cropped photos, the deleted video, and every other piece of evidence they'd tried to erase. That night, I emailed just one thing to the community center, the original birthday tribute video, the same one Vera deleted from Clara's event. I offered it, without context, for their upcoming Women's History Month montage. No message, no backstory, only the file. My voice, my story, in full. The next afternoon, it aired quietly online. It didn't go viral. It didn't need to. Clara saw it. She texted Vera one word. Enough. I saw the read receipt. No reply came. I deleted Vera's accidental message after that, didn't respond, didn't screenshot it. Some things aren't meant to be held onto, even if they're handed to you directly. She expected me to burn down. I didn't. I lit the room instead. The next morning, the phone rang 13 times. I didn't answer. I brewed coffee, opened my laptop, and created a blank document. Not a blog, not a letter, a manuscript. Page 1 read, "The Disappearing Daughter." The calls started just after sunrise. The phone lit up beside my bed, like it knew the day had changed shape before I did. The first came from Clara. Then Vera. Then an unknown number I knew better than to answer. I sat in bed, knees pulled up under the blanket, phone in my palm, listening to the voicemails one by one. Vera's voice, cracked and breathless. "Arlena, I don't know what you think you're doing. You need to stop before you ruin everything." Clara's message was slower, measured, almost rehearsed. "We'd like to speak, if you're open to it." We didn't realize the full extent. But the one that stayed with me was nearly silent. Just a faint sigh, followed by Clara's whisper. "I don't know where we lost you. I didn't save the messages." Later that morning, I pulled on a coat and walked to the river trail a few blocks from my apartment. The same one Dad used to take me to on weekends when we needed a break from the house, from the noise, from them. I tucked his unsent email in my inside pocket. Printed and folded once, it felt like an anchor against my chest. I didn't cry. I let my feet move with the rhythm of the water beside me, the quiet air pulling the tension out of my shoulders, word by word. I am still here. I didn't vanish. That was the sentence I repeated, softly under my breath, like a spell. A truth I carved deeper with every step. When I returned, there was a package leaning against my front door. No return label. No note. Inside, the original family photo. Uncropped. All four of us, standing stiffly in front of Yellowstone's jagged skyline. My arm was still awkwardly slung behind Vera's back. I remembered how we argued about where to stand that day, how Dad eventually said, "It's just a picture, girls." But it wasn't just a picture. It never was. Taped behind the frame was a folded piece of paper. I recognized the yellowing edges, the handwriting mine. It was the poem I'd written at 11, the one Clara pretended not to remember when Vera claimed it as a collaboration. She had kept it, quietly, tucked away. I didn't call to thank her. Some things don't need words. And Vera? She didn't call again. No apology, no explanation. But over the next few days, I saw her name disappear from several press releases, foundation pages, project credits, just gone replaced with the generic team or committee. I didn't feel triumphant. I just breathed a little easier. A week later, I spoke at a small community group downtown. A friend had asked me to talk about the role of story in personal identity. I almost said no, but I went. I didn't name names. I didn't dwell on betrayal. I told a simple truth. I was once erased, but I reappeared on my own terms. There was a long pause after I finished. Then one woman stood, eyes glassy, and said, "I've been waiting my whole life to hear someone say that." The following Monday, I signed a publishing contract with a small press out of Seattle. Nothing flashy, but real. The book was titled Disappeared, A Daughter's Undoing. On the dedication page, I wrote, "For anyone who needed proof they were real." Afterward, I closed the laptop, stretched my arms above my head, and padded barefoot into the kitchen. I boiled water, steeped tea, stood there watching the leaves swirl slowly. The apartment was quiet, but this quiet belonged to me. As sunlight slanted through the blinds, I glanced toward the windowsill. The photo sat there in a simple frame uncropped. Next to it, my father's email, printed on ivory paper, framed beside it. I didn't frame them to prove a point. I framed them to remember that I never needed to be louder. I just needed to stop waiting for someone else to say I mattered. The light hit both frames, then warmed my cheek, and I smiled. Small, but steady. Sometimes the people who silence us the most are the ones who claim to love us the loudest. I spent years trying to earn my place at a table that had already decided I didn't belong. But the truth is, your worth isn't up for vote, and your memories aren't optional. If you're someone who's ever been overlooked, rewritten, or made to feel small, know this. You don't need their permission to exist. You don't need to be louder, you just need to stand still long enough for your truth to echo. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever felt like your story was hijacked by someone else? Or that you had to prove you belonged in your own family? Tell me below. Drop a 1 if this story hit close to home, or just let me know where you're watching from. And if this video meant something to you, if it stirred something inside, or made you reflect, don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more stories that speak to the heart, challenge the silence, and remind us that we're not alone. I'll be reading the comments. Let's keep the conversation going.
Hello. My name's Sadie. When my grandfather passed, he left behind land, businesses, money, but not for me. He left me a rusted-out truck that barely held together, and when the will was read, my sister laughed, right there, in front of everyone. They all did. But what if that rust-covered truck held something no one saw coming? What if it was never junk, but a message? A secret only I was meant to uncover. Why would Grandpa give me something everyone else thought was worthless? And what happens when the one they tried to erase becomes the one they can't ignore? I still remember that gray morning like a bruise that never faded. The chapel smelled faintly of lilies, the kind florists set out when grief has to be dressed up in perfume. I sat in the second pew, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, the weight of silence pressing down on me. Grandpa was gone, and I thought the hardest part of this week would be lowering him into the ground. I was wrong. The attorney cleared his throat as he unfolded the will. His voice was measured, practiced, as though he had read thousands before this one. He listed off the properties, rental homes, farmland, a handful of stocks, each name tied neatly to a relative. Heads nodded, satisfied murmurs rolled through the room. Then he paused, his eyes flicking to me. "To Sadie," he said. "He leaves the 1979 Ford F-150, non-operational, currently stored in the barn." The room went still for a moment. Then I heard it. Seraphine's laugh. It wasn't just a chuckle. It was sharp, bright, cutting through the solemn air like glass shattering. "Figures," she said, pressing a manicured hand to her chest as if she couldn't contain herself. "She gets junk." A ripple of laughter followed. My uncle shook his head, cousins exchanged looks, someone behind me muttered, "Well, that sounds about right." I sat frozen, every nerve in my body screaming to get up and walk out. Instead, I stared at the polished shoes of the attorney, trying to anchor myself to something steady. My cheeks burned, but I forced my face to stay blank. If I let them see the humiliation, they'd take it as confirmation that I deserved it. When the reading ended, people rose slowly, whispering in small groups, some shaking their heads at the unfairness, others smirking as if justice had been served. I didn't remember standing, but suddenly I was on my feet, my palms damp, my throat tight. Later that evening, Seraphine hosted the family at her house, a sprawling 2-story with glass windows and white columns. I went only because I didn't want my absence to give them another excuse to say I didn't belong. The living room was filled with chatter and the sound of glasses clinking. I stood near the doorway, clutching a cup of water, overhearing scraps of conversation. "Sadie's inheritance," one cousin laughed. "Hope she knows how to tow." "Maybe she'll open a scrapyard," another chimed in. My phone buzzed. I looked down and saw the family group chat lighting up. There it was, a photo of Grandpa's truck, rust streaking the sides, one wheel sagging into the dirt. Seraphine had snapped it and posted it with the caption, "Our little sister's grand inheritance." Junkyard Queen. Laughing emojis filled the screen. Thumbs up signs, sarcastic claps. My chest tightened. I placed the cup on the nearest table and slipped out before anyone could notice. The air outside was cool, but it didn't soothe the heat rising under my skin. I climbed into my old sedan and drove away. The road stretched ahead, empty and dark, and with every mile, the weight in my chest grew heavier. I had always been the overlooked one, the youngest, the one people patted on the head, told to keep quiet, told I'd never carry weight in this family. Grandpa was the only person who saw me differently. He'd hand me a wrench, let me crawl under the truck with him, tell me I had steady hands. Now I wondered if even he had seen me as a joke. Had that old truck been a mistake, or was it his way of saying I was worth nothing? I pulled into my driveway and shut off the car. The house was too quiet without him. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, tears sliding down before I could stop them. I pressed my forehead against the cool leather, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. The next morning, I drove back to the family estate. The sky was pale blue, sunlight breaking through thin clouds. The gravel crunched under my tires as I parked near the porch. Seraphine was already outside, leaning back in a chair, coffee cup in hand. Her silk robe shimmered in the light, her nails painted the color of blood roses. She smiled at me, a slow, mocking curve of her lips. "Here for the keys?" she asked, tilting her head. She didn't wait for my answer. "Hope you enjoy sleeping in that truck." I stood at the bottom of the steps, forcing my hands to stay at my sides. My breath caught, but I didn't give her the satisfaction of a reply. She dangled the keys between her fingers for a moment, then tossed them lightly toward me. They jingled as they landed in my palm. My hand trembled, but I tightened my grip. I turned without a word and walked back toward the barn. Behind me, I heard her laugh again, softer this time, but no less cruel. The barn doors creaked as I pulled them open. Dust swirled in the beams of light that filtered through the slats, and there it was, the truck. Its once blue paint eaten by rust, tires sagging, windshield clouded. I stood there, staring, the laughter of my family still echoing in my ears. They thought they'd buried me under rust, turned me into a punchline. But as I stepped closer, running my hand along the rough metal, something stirred inside me. Not hope exactly, not yet, but something that didn't feel like defeat. That night, as I stood in front of Grandpa's truck for the first time, I felt every eye rolling, every laugh echoing in my chest. But I also felt something else, something none of them could see. It wasn't just the weight of their laughter I carried when I walked out of that barn. It was the way it clung to my skin like smoke. By the time I got back to my place, I couldn't even bring myself to go inside. My hands still trembled from holding the truck keys, so I just sat in my car for a while, staring at nothing. I didn't sleep that night. Around 5 in the morning, when the sky hadn't decided yet if it wanted to be dawn or stay dark, I packed a single duffel with clothes for me and Micah, my son. Tossed in a pillow, 2 blankets, and a picture frame I didn't even have the nerve to look at. We didn't have much to begin with. There wasn't much to take. I drove to a strip of forgotten pavement behind an old grocery store off Route 66. The building had been boarded up for years, but the lot was still open, still quiet. The truck sat there waiting, as rusted and tired as I felt. I parked beside it, cut the engine, and sat in silence. Micah stirred in the back seat. "You okay, Mom?" I forced a smile. "Yeah, baby. We're just taking a little break. That okay with you?" He nodded, still half asleep. I didn't tell him we weren't going back to the apartment. I didn't tell him his aunt had laughed me out of the will and the family. He'd find out soon enough, and I needed just a few more hours where he could feel like a kid. By noon, I'd moved everything we had into the truck. It smelled like mildew and grease and something else, something old and metallic that had seeped into the fabric of the cracked leather seats. I wiped down what I could, tossed a blanket over the back bench, and made a little nest for Micah to sleep in. He watched me work with wide, quiet eyes, like he was trying to understand without asking too many questions. That night, the wind made the truck creak in places I didn't know it could move. The cold snuck through the gaps in the windows. I wrapped Micah in both blankets, tucked the picture frame under the seat, and sat awake with my coat zipped all the way up, staring through the windshield at the grocery store's boarded-up sign. "How low can they push me?" I whispered, my breath fogging the glass. Nobody answered. The next day, I scraped together what little change I had left in my wallet and walked to the convenience store 2 blocks down. Micah stayed behind, drawing with his finger on the fogged-up window. The clerk didn't look at me when I paid with quarters and nickels for 2 packets of ramen noodles and a pack of gum. I thanked him anyway. As I stepped outside, I heard the purr of an engine too smooth to be from anywhere near here. A white Range Rover pulled up next to the truck. Of course it was her. Seraphine rolled down her window, sunglasses on, blonde hair pulled tight like she was heading to a fundraiser, not stalking me on the edge of a parking lot. "Well, look at this," she said, voice sweet as syrup. "Home sweet home, huh? Maybe you can rent it out to raccoons when you're not using it." I stared at her, my hands tightening around the paper bag. I didn't say a word. Micah's face appeared behind the passenger window. He looked down at his feet as soon as he saw her. Seraphine's smile widened like she'd scored a point. "Tell your son to keep the windows rolled up. Wouldn't want him catching something from all that rust." She sped off before I could respond. Not that I would've. My silence was all I had left, that she hadn't mocked. Back in the truck, Micah didn't say anything at first. He sat in the corner with his arms wrapped around his knees, staring out. "Is she right?" he asked eventually. "Are we living here now?" I sat down next to him, handed him a warm cup of ramen, and brushed a hand over his messy hair. "Just for a little while. Till things get better." He nodded, but I saw it in his eyes, that flicker of embarrassment, not at me, at our situation, and that hurt more than any insult his aunt could throw. The next morning, I walked him to school. We didn't talk much on the way. I hugged him before he walked through the doors, told him to keep his head up, reminded him how smart and kind he was. He gave me a half-hearted smile and disappeared into the building. That afternoon, he climbed into the truck with slumped shoulders and glassy eyes. "What happened?" He shook his head. "Nothing." "Micah." He hesitated, then said it fast, like ripping off a Band-Aid. "Some kids said you live in trash. They said you sleep in a junkyard." I stared at him, my hands frozen around the thermos I was holding. "And what did you say?" "Nothing." I didn't know what to say. I didn't answer right away. I pulled him close and held him, resting my cheek on his head. He didn't cry. He just let out a shaky breath, like a balloon slowly leaking air. It's one thing for them to laugh at me. I've had decades of practice with that. But to see it bleed onto my son, to see the shame they'd painted on me start staining him, that I could not forgive. That night, after I made sure Micah was asleep, I sat behind the wheel of Grandpa's truck. My fingers traced the rim of the steering wheel, the ridges smooth from years of use.
I thought about all the times I sat beside him, watching him drive with one hand, humming old country songs. My tears came quiet, steady. Not because I was sad, not really, but because I'd finally stopped feeling numb. "I won't let them define us," I whispered. "Not me, not him." And just like that, something shifted. I looked out at the empty lot, the cracked pavement, the sky folding into black above us. They thought this truck was my coffin, but I decided it would be my weapon. Micah was still sleeping when I stepped out of the truck the next morning. His small body was curled up in the back seat, his head resting against a pillow that had lost most of its fluff. The air was cool and damp, and the sky above Tulsa wore that familiar pale gray, the kind that didn't promise rain, but couldn't commit to sunshine either. I needed to move. I needed to do something with my hands before my thoughts swallowed me whole. So I grabbed the sponge I'd found yesterday near the dumpster, crusty but still intact, and a half-empty bottle of dish soap from my duffel bag. I filled an old coffee can with water from the hose behind the building and knelt beside the truck, starting with the passenger side door. The rust flaked off in uneven patches, some pieces falling like burnt paper. I didn't have a goal, not really. Maybe I just wanted to see something clean, something I could fix, something that didn't look like it belonged in a junkyard or in a family's inside joke. That's when I saw it. The sponge caught on a jagged edge just beneath the handle. I leaned in, squinting. What I thought was more rust looked different. It didn't crumble like the others. The surface underneath wasn't dull, but instead had a warm, muted glow, just enough to catch the morning light. My heart thudded. I blinked, wiped again. It shimmered. I dropped the sponge, my breath catching halfway up my throat. No, it couldn't be. But there it was again, a thin line, maybe the width of 2 fingers, glinting softly under the rust. Not paint, not chrome. This had weight, this had color, the kind you didn't see on old metal, the kind that wasn't supposed to be here. I reached for the edge with my thumbnail, scraping carefully. More flakes came off, revealing a smooth patch underneath. No corrosion, no pits, just dense golden sheen. Not yellow paint, not brass. I knew that color. My fingers knew it. My grandfather's old coin jar had looked just like this. "Is this?" I whispered, not daring to finish the question out loud. I looked around the lot. Empty. Just cracked asphalt and a row of dumpsters leaning like tired soldiers. I glanced back at the truck. Was this why Grandpa left it to me? Had he known what was hidden beneath? And if so, why not just tell me? That night, after Micah had drifted off to sleep again, I sat quietly behind the wheel, the small golden patch still hidden beneath a piece of duct tape I'd placed over it. I needed to be sure I wasn't losing it, needed someone who could tell me this wasn't just wishful thinking wrapped in grief and desperation. I didn't want to involve anyone, especially not anyone who still talked to Seraphine, but there was one person I could trust. Calder. He'd worked alongside Grandpa for nearly 2 decades, ran the body shop down on Jennings Avenue before retiring. I hadn't seen him in years, not since the family started icing me out. But if anyone knew what Grandpa was up to in that barn, it'd be him. I waited 3 days, just to be sure no one had seen me moving around the truck more than usual. Then, early one morning, before the sun had fully stretched across the skyline, I drove to the edge of town and parked behind the boarded-up bait shop across from Calder's house. He opened the door like he'd been expecting me. "Sadie," he said, tilting his head, his eyes narrowing just a little like he was trying to recognize someone after too many birthdays had passed. "Well, ain't seen you since—" "I know," I said gently. "I wouldn't come if it wasn't important." He motioned me inside. The kitchen was clean, modest. A single cup of coffee sat steaming on the counter. "I don't have much time," I said. "I need you to look at something for me." From my pocket, I pulled the jagged strip I'd pried from the inner frame beneath the door. It was small, no bigger than a stick of gum, but heavy. I wrapped it in an old napkin and placed it on the table like I was laying down a live wire. Calder didn't touch it at first. He just stared. Then, slowly, he reached for his reading glasses, perched them on the bridge of his nose, and lifted the piece into the light. After a long pause, he let out a low whistle.
I'll be damned, he muttered, turning it over. You know what this is? I have a guess, I said, but I need to hear it from someone who actually knows. Calder set the piece down and folded his arms. Your grandfather ever tell you how he used to hide things? Not just physically, but in plain sight? I nodded. He used to say, the best place to hide a treasure is where no one would ever think to look for it. He chuckled, low and rough. Sounds like him. I sat down across from him, my knees weak. I think it's gold, Calder. Real gold. And not just a layer. I think the truck might be built with it, or lined at least. He didn't laugh, didn't scoff. He just looked down at the metal again. Your grandfather told me once, years ago, back when we were closing down the old shop, he said, that truck carries the family's real future. I thought he was talking about sentiment, memories. Hell, I didn't think twice about it. He leaned back in his chair and looked at me. Maybe he meant it literally. I exhaled slowly, the pressure in my chest loosening just a bit. I don't want anyone to know, I said. Not yet, especially not her. You mean Seraphine? I nodded. Calder shook his head. She always wanted the spotlight, that one. Your grandpa knew it. That's why he gave her what looked flashy, but left the real thing to the one who'd look past the surface. I blinked back something that felt too close to tears. That truck's not just rust and bolts, Calder said, pushing the metal back toward me. It's trust. I wrapped the piece carefully and tucked it back into my jacket. When I stood, he stood too. If you need help, he said, you come to me, quietly. I will, I promised. Thank you. The drive back was quiet. Micah was still asleep when I climbed into the truck. I pulled the blanket over his shoulder, then pulled the glove compartment open and hid the gold strip beneath an old map of Oklahoma. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't shiver or feel sorry for myself. I just sat there in the dark, my hands resting on the steering wheel, and whispered to no one, this stays between me and him. The shame they gave me had turned into something else, something silent, something sharp. For the first time since the will was read, I felt like I wasn't losing, I was waiting. It started with a flyer. I found it wedged under the truck's wiper blade on a Thursday morning, flapping lightly in the breeze like it was taunting me. An invitation, hand-lettered in pink script with gold trim. Carter Family Brunch, celebrating the success of Seraphine's new storefront and business expansion. Below the title was a smiling photo of Seraphine and her husband posed in front of a recently renovated brick building downtown. I stared at it longer than I should have. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe pride still had a little grip on me, whispering that I should show up just to prove I wasn't broken. Maybe I just wanted to see who else had moved on without me. I didn't dress fancy. I didn't bother with makeup. I wore clean jeans, a faded blue shirt, and tied my hair back. Micah stayed home with Calder, who offered before I even asked. Ain't no place for a boy, he said with a grim look. This ain't a brunch, it's a parade. He wasn't wrong. When I pulled into the country club parking lot, the place was packed. SUVs, convertibles, and imported cars lined the circular drive like showroom models. Everyone looked polished, rehearsed. The kind of people who kept a second set of silverware just for holidays and smiled with their teeth only. I walked in through the side entrance and made my way to the outdoor garden where the brunch was being held. String lights hung from the trees, tables draped in linen, mimosas flowing. Someone played acoustic guitar near a barista cart, and every few minutes, a round of polite laughter would float across the lawn. And there she was, center stage, as always. Seraphine wore a cream-colored wrap dress that hugged her like it had been stitched onto her that morning. Her hair was perfect, nails like painted glass. She moved from group to group like a politician, all smiles and shoulder touches, as if she hadn't thrown me into a ditch just weeks earlier. A woman leaned in to hug her and asked, "What's next for you, Seraphine? First the boutique, now this new line of eco-candles?" "Oh, you know me," she said with a breezy laugh. "Some of us were just born to build." That line hit me harder than I expected. Some of us were just born to build. I wasn't even sure she remembered she had a sister when she said it. That was the part that stung the most. She didn't even need to look me in the eye anymore to erase me. She'd already done it. I kept walking, drifting between tables, dodging the eyes of cousins and in-laws. No one said hello. No one asked why I was there. It was like I'd turned invisible the moment I stepped onto the patio. Later, when most of the guests were too busy posing for selfies near the cake table to notice, I slipped into the main house. The foyer was filled with flowers and gift baskets, the scent of vanilla and roses nearly overwhelming. I paused near the staircase, letting my gaze drift toward the gallery wall Seraphine had installed a few years ago. It was her version of a family tree, dozens of framed photographs arranged in perfect rows, formal portraits, holiday candids, backyard birthday parties. I scanned the wall, one frame at a time, and stopped cold halfway down. There was a new centerpiece photo, blown up larger than the rest. The whole family stood shoulder to shoulder, Seraphine, Mom and Dad, a few cousins, even the great aunt no one liked talking to, everyone smiling, everyone dressed in coordinated pastel tones, everyone but me. I wasn't in the photo, not even in the background, not cropped out, just not there. My mouth went dry. I took a step closer, looking for any sign that I'd been forgotten by accident. "Printer must have skipped you," Seraphine said casually from the hallway. I turned slowly. She held a glass of lemonade in her hand, her tone light, unbothered, like she was commenting on the weather.
Oops, my jaw tightened. You've made your point. She smiled wider, shrugged. What point? It's not my fault you keep disappearing. For a second, I thought about smashing the glass in her hand, not because of the picture, not because of the party, but because she said it like it was true, like I had done this to myself. I didn't say another word. I walked out, down the hall, past the guests, and back to the truck. By the time I turned onto the old highway heading west, the sun had dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows across the road. The hum of the tires gave my thoughts room to breathe, and in that silence, the truth settled in. They had erased me. Not just from a picture, from the story, from the narrative they'd built where Seraphine was the shining star, and I was the footnote they'd long since edited out. But gold doesn't vanish. It doesn't rust, not really. It waits. And when the light hits it just right, it shines so bright, it's blinding.
That night, after putting Micah to bed, I sat behind the wheel of Grandpa's truck again. I held the keys in my hand, turned them slowly between my fingers, thinking about the shimmer I'd uncovered under the rust, thinking about Calder's words, thinking about the strip of gold hidden beneath the old road map in the glove box. It wasn't just metal. It was a promise, a legacy. I gripped the steering wheel, my eyes fixed on the cracked windshield ahead of me. The engine hadn't turned over in weeks, but I didn't need it to start tonight. I just needed to remember what was mine. If they wanted me erased, I whispered to the darkness, I would make sure I became unforgettable. I didn't sleep much after the brunch, not because I was angry. Anger had passed. What I felt now was colder, quieter, like standing alone in a frozen field, listening for something that wouldn't come.
I lay in the back of the truck next to Micah, watching his chest rise and fall, thinking about the photo on the wall, the one I wasn't in, the one where Seraphine smiled like she'd already buried me. If they wanted me erased, I'd make damn sure I left a mark that didn't fade. The next evening, I found myself pulling up the floor mat in the back of the truck. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, maybe just a distraction. Maybe some lost bolt from Grandpa's old toolbox. Maybe nothing. But when my hand brushed against something hard and cold beneath the carpet lining, I froze. It wasn't a part of the truck. It was separate, small and square. I pushed back the rubber mat and reached into the narrow space behind the seat, my fingers finding the edge of a box. It scraped against metal as I pulled it free. The thing was caked in rust and grime, but unmistakably a lockbox. No key. I took a flathead screwdriver from my emergency kit and wedged it into the seam, working it slowly, praying I didn't break whatever was inside. After a minute of steady pressure and a frustrated grunt or two, the latch gave way with a sharp click. Inside were papers, dozens of them, folded, yellowed, some bound together with twine. I sat back, stunned. Under the glow of my phone's flashlight, I unfolded the top sheet. It was a deed. Grandpa's name signed at the bottom, dated just 6 months before he passed. It transferred ownership of a parcel of land near Highway 61, land I didn't even know he still owned.
The next bundle was labeled Carter Holdings, Inc., with attached documentation, minutes from meetings, original stock certificates, shares, all in his handwriting, all assigned to me. My hands began to shake. I flipped through them one by one, my eyes blurring. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a forgotten box. He had done this on purpose. Every legal document, every note, every signature had my name on it. The truck wasn't a joke. It was a message. He had trusted me, not Seraphine, not the family that lined up for pieces of him before the funeral dirt had settled. Me. I pressed the back of my hand to my mouth, trying to steady my breath. My chest ached in a new way, raw, but no longer hollow. "Grandpa," I whispered, "you didn't forget me. You didn't leave me behind." The next morning, I drove into town with the box tucked safely beneath the passenger seat. I stopped at a quiet pawn shop on 3rd Street and sold a tiny sliver of gold I'd peeled from the truck's underframe the week before. It was enough to get me started, barely, but enough. I knew what I needed to do. By the end of the week, I found an old run-down garage for rent at the edge of Main Street. The windows were cracked, the floor was stained with oil and neglect, and the last tenant had left behind a pile of broken furniture. But the bones were solid. I could work with it. I took a photo of the building and printed out a piece of paper in the public library's computer lab. It read, "Rust to Rise, Auto Repairs. Restorations." Underneath the name, I sketched a simple outline of Grandpa's truck in gold ink. It wasn't perfect, but it felt right. I pinned the paper inside the dusty window and started sweeping. The days that followed were long and brutal. I painted, scrubbed, fixed the broken hydraulic lift with a part I'd salvaged from a junkyard. Calder dropped by with an old radio and a jug of iced tea. "You're stubborn," he said with a crooked smile. "Your grandpa would have been proud." I smiled back. "He better be. He left me with nothing but rust." He laughed, patted the front counter and said, "Nothing but rust and a legacy." We didn't talk about Seraphine, not directly, but I knew the moment she found out. It was a Tuesday morning, clear sky and good breeze. I was setting up the tire racks when her Range Rover crept past the shop. She didn't stop, just slowed down, sunglasses on, lips pursed like she'd bitten into something sour. I didn't wave, I didn't smile, I just kept stacking tires, because I was done shrinking. By the end of that month, I had my first paying customer, a retired teacher named Mr. Dawson who needed his battery replaced. Then came a single mom with a flat. Then a middle-aged man who said, "I heard you used to work with Carter's old crew. That true?" "I learned from the best," I said simply, and meant it. I didn't rush. I didn't try to grow too fast. Every dollar went back into the shop. I bought better tools. I replaced the flickering light above the entry. I even found a bench to place out front so folks could sit while they waited. Each night, I locked up the garage and walked across the street to the truck. Micah would be inside with his homework spread across the back seat, earbuds in. He always looked up when I opened the door, eyes bright. "You tired?" he'd ask. "Not tired," I'd say. "Just ready." He didn't understand the difference yet, but he would. One evening, while I was locking up, Calder showed up again, holding a can of paint. "What's this for?" I asked. He winked. "For the truck." I shook my head. "It's not time yet." He studied me, thoughtful. "You're still waiting." "Yeah," I said. "But not forever." That night, as I sat behind the wheel of the truck, my hands aching from work, my heart surprisingly steady, I thought about everything I'd built from the ashes of humiliation. Every bolt tightened was a piece of my backbone growing back. Every repair was a promise I made to myself. Every time someone trusted me with their car, their time, their money, I took it as proof that I was still here, still standing, still valuable, because every screw I turned wasn't just fixing cars, it was fixing me. It didn't take long. I'd barely settled into a rhythm at the shop, sweeping before dawn, wiping grease off my hands between customers, learning which parts suppliers wouldn't ask too many questions about cash payments before the whispers started. Not about me, about her. Calder was the first to mention it. He stopped by one afternoon, leaning against the doorframe with a paper bag full of brake pads and a subtle gleam in his eyes. Seraphine's got herself in a mess, he said casually, like he was commenting on the weather. I didn't bite, not at first. He continued anyway. You know that big new office she opened on 3rd? Word is she can't pay the contractor. They halted the plumbing last week. Half-finished work and no inspection passed. I kept organizing my socket wrenches, pretending I wasn't listening. But I was. She's overextended, he added. Again. It wasn't just the office. Over the next couple of weeks, more stories floated through town, through customers, through the woman who ran the sandwich shop down the block, even through Micah's teacher, who mentioned offhandedly that the PTA had been trying to get Seraphine to pay her promised donation for months. Maybe she forgot, the teacher said, smiling too tight, but she's usually so visible. Visible. That was the word. Seraphine lived for visibility, for applause. For the curated photo, the perfectly chosen quote, the impression of having it all, but behind the filters and matching outfits, the seams were coming undone. I drove past her boutique one afternoon after finishing a brake-line job. The grand reopening banner was still hanging limp over the entry, sun-bleached and curling at the corners. A young man, probably no older than 20, stood on the sidewalk yelling into a phone. She said the check would clear. I'm not doing another day's work until we get paid. I parked a few blocks away and walked into the coffee shop across the street, ordered a tea, and sat near the window, just watching. Seraphine pulled up 15 minutes later in her white SUV. She stepped out, heels clicking, hair flawless. She barely looked at the man still pacing near the door. She adjusted her sunglasses, smiled at someone she recognized across the street, and posed as if a camera might be watching, even though none was. She was performing. Always had been. But this time, it looked like even she didn't believe her own act anymore. A few days later, as the August heat pressed against the sidewalks and made every engine work twice as hard, Calder showed up at the garage with someone I hadn't seen in years. Sadie, Calder said, holding the door open. You remember Emmett Morris? The man behind him stepped forward, older now, slower, with a cane in one hand and deep lines across his face. His overalls still had the faint outline of a name tag long since worn away. Your grandpa and I used to work the line together back in the old Carter warehouse, he said with a kind smile. Didn't know you had your own shop now. I offered him a seat and a glass of water, and we all settled into the small office in the back, where the air conditioner struggled but tried its best. I came across something, I told him after a few minutes of polite catch-up. In the truck. Something I wasn't sure I'd ever understand. I pulled out the folder, carefully organized now, of Grandpa's papers, the ones from the lockbox. Emmett looked through them slowly, nodding. When he reached the deed and saw my name written beside Grandpa's, he paused. I remember when he first started talking about it, he said. That old truck. Said he was going to pour everything he had left into something no one else could touch. Said he'd already given the shiny stuff to folks who wanted shine. But the truck? That was for the one who saw value under the dirt. He looked up at me, eyes steady. He meant you. My throat tightened. I nodded slowly. He told me, Emmett went on, that it wasn't just about the metal or the land or even the truck. It was about giving you something they couldn't fake, legacy, the kind that doesn't need a hashtag. Calder smiled at that. Told you, didn't I? I sat there, quiet for a moment, letting it sink in. I'd spent so much time wondering if I was imagining the meaning behind Grandpa's gift, if I'd created a story just to protect myself. But now, hearing it from someone who'd worked by his side, it felt real, tangible. He made sure I couldn't be erased, I said softly. Emmett nodded. No, ma'am. He made sure you'd outlast them. After they left, I locked the office door and sat with the papers spread in front of me. I ran my fingers over the signatures, the seals, the deliberate care Grandpa had taken to leave something that couldn't be spun, couldn't be faked, couldn't be polished for Instagram. That night, as I swept the shop floor and put away the tools, I noticed how quiet my thoughts had become. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't replaying every insult. I wasn't waiting for the next blow. I was simply existing, calmly. There was strength in that. I leaned against the garage door, the evening sun casting long shadows across the lot, and closed my eyes. For years, I whispered to myself, I thought silence meant weakness. But now I see, It's the weight of patience, and patience is turning into power. The next day, I had two more walk-ins, a man who needed a new alternator, and a woman who didn't know why her engine light was on. I didn't fix their lives. I didn't wave a wand, I just did the work. One bolt at a time, one calloused hand after another. And as I pulled down the bay door that night, listening to the heavy rattle of metal settling into place, I felt it. The shift. I was no longer reacting to what Seraphine did. I was building something she couldn't touch. Seraphine could feel her crown slipping, and I knew she'd come for me before it fell. The next morning came hot and breathless. Tulsa's August sun had no mercy, especially when it settled low and heavy over cracked pavement and tin roofs. By noon, the air in my shop clung to my skin, thick and unforgiving. The fan above my desk hummed and clicked, failing to do much more than move the heat from one corner to another. I spent the day with my head down, fixing a leaking transmission and replacing brake pads for a woman who said she'd followed the smell of grease and honesty. Her words, not mine. By the time the sun dipped behind the neighboring buildings and the shop took on that familiar quiet of a day well spent, I was closing the register and wiping oil off my hands when I heard it. The door slammed. It wasn't just a push. It was a statement. I turned, rag still in hand. And there she was, Seraphine, standing in the doorway of my shop like she owned it. Still dressed to impress, though the sheen of wealth had begun to dull around the edges. Her lipstick was slightly smeared, her heels dusted from the gravel outside. But her posture? Rigid, angry. "Congratulations," she said, her voice sharp and brittle. "Your little garage is the talk of Main Street." I didn't respond. Just walked to the back wall and began organizing tools I'd already organized that morning. She didn't wait for permission to keep going. "You've been parading around like some underdog hero," she sneered. "Everyone's acting like you built this from nothing, but you didn't, Sadie. You stole it." That stopped me. I turned slowly and met her eyes. "Stole?" She took a step closer, her breath catching. "You took what was supposed to be mine. That truck, that land, those papers." Grandpa was confused. He was old. "He wasn't confused," I said calmly. Seraphine's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You think he loved you more?" Her voice cracked. "You think you were special?" She spat, tears beginning to pool, thick with frustration. "You think helping him change his oil once a week gave you the right to everything?" She was unraveling. "Ever since we were kids, it was always about poor little Sadie. You didn't have the looks, the grades, the ambition, but somehow everyone always pitied you. And Grandpa? He treated you like you were some delicate project. You don't get to build a kingdom off of his pity." I folded my arms, letting her words bounce off me like hail on steel. "You were never going to be more than the girl who peeked in a shop apron," she continued. "You're not like me." "You're right," I said softly. She blinked, surprised. "I'm not like you." That hung in the air for a moment, until her body gave out beneath the weight of it all. She dropped onto the chair near the register, heels thudding against the concrete. Her head hung low, and her shoulders trembled. When she looked up, the fire in her eyes had dimmed, replaced by something desperate and raw. "We're sisters," she whispered. "You can't just turn your back on that. I made mistakes. But you don't have to make it worse." Her mascara was streaked now, black lines dragging beneath her eyes. "I've lost everything," she said. "You wouldn't let me lose everything, would you?" She was still performing, still trying to spin vulnerability into guilt, hoping I'd reach across the table and save her from the consequences of her own ambition. I didn't move. I didn't speak. She stared at me, waiting, but I had nothing to offer. Not this time. The silence stretched, uncomfortable and heavy. Eventually, she rose to her feet, fixing her jacket like she could somehow reassemble herself by straightening a seam. She didn't say goodbye. The door slammed behind her just as hard as it had when she entered. I stood there for a long while, listening to the hum of the overhead lights, the quiet rattle of tools settling in drawers. My heart thudded slow and steady in my chest. All my life, she wanted me erased. She treated me like a typo in her perfect script, something to be redacted or rewritten. Now she wanted mercy, but what she didn't know What she couldn't understand was that mercy was no longer mine to give. I'd already made my choice. That night, I closed the shop and walked across the lot to the truck. Micah was curled up in the front seat, watching a movie on my phone with one earbud in. He looked up and smiled. I kissed the top of his head and slid into the driver's seat, the leather warm beneath me. I stared through the windshield, into the soft gold of twilight, the horizon stretching wide and empty in front of me. The next time she walked through my door, I would not be silent. She returned on a Wednesday afternoon, just after I'd finished helping a young couple whose car wouldn't shift into reverse. Calder was leaning by the garage door, sipping his iced tea like always, nodding as I handed the couple their receipt and waved them off. Then Seraphine walked in, not storming this time. No drama, no stomping heels. She moved like someone who was trying very hard to look composed while falling apart from the inside out. Her hair was still curled, but not freshly. Her blouse looked expensive but wrinkled. Her eyes were hidden behind designer sunglasses, but her mouth had no smile left. Calder noticed her first, his posture stiffening. He didn't say a word, just nodded once at me and quietly slipped into the back. She stopped in front of the counter where I was sorting invoices and cleared her throat. "We need to talk," she said. I didn't look up, just reached for a roll of ribbon to finish tying up a customer's receipt. I was careful with the knot, precise. Then I slid the paper across the counter and looked at her. "This home," I said softly but clearly, "was built on respect and love." She blinked, unsure of where I was going. "Two things you never gave me." Her jaw clenched. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The silence in the room did all the heavy lifting. She looked around as if someone might come to her defense, as if someone, anyone, would swoop in and say, "Come on, Sadie, don't be like that." But no one did. I went back to my papers, not to be cruel, but because it was done, because I didn't need to yell to be heard anymore. She stood there for a moment, swallowing whatever last thread of pride she had left, then turned around and walked out without another word. Her heels tapped across the concrete like they weren't even sure where to go next. The door shut behind her, and Calder peeked back in. "Well," he said after a moment. That sounded final. I didn't answer, just nodded and exhaled slowly, the way you do when something heavy finally leaves the room. In the weeks that followed, the energy shifted. I'd been saving money quietly, working evenings and weekends, doing oil changes, patching tires, diagnosing bad alternators. Most of the town still called me the Carter girl out of habit, but now it came with a different tone. Respectful, curious. I decided to do something with the truck. Not just hide it in the back anymore. Not just keep it as a relic of pain or pride. I repainted it. Took my time with it, too. Sanded the rust slowly, layer by layer, like I was peeling away every insult, every eye roll, every time I'd been overlooked. I buffed the metal until my fingers ached. Sprayed a matte coat in a deep, smoky silver. Left one strip of raw gold exposed along the bottom panel, just enough to catch the light and hint at the truth underneath. And on the driver's door, I painted a logo, a golden outline of the truck with Grandpa's initials inside it. It wasn't a restoration, it was a transformation. Once it was ready, I started using it as a mobile help center. Micah and I packed fresh groceries in the back on Saturday mornings, delivered to older folks who couldn't drive. Calder built a fold-out step for kids to hop into the truck bed when we handed out backpacks before school. A retired teacher down the street helped organize a book swap. A local mechanic who used to work for my dad donated tires. And people noticed, not because of the paint or the logo, but because the truck kept showing up, reliable, steady, quiet, just like I'd always been. At the fall community picnic, they asked me to park it by the food tents. I was hesitant at first, but when I arrived, I saw a small crowd already waiting. Someone had printed flyers, Rust to Rise, community truck. Micah handed out water bottles while I answered questions. One man clapped me on the shoulder and said, "You did more with that old truck than anyone thought possible. You turned rust into gold." I smiled and shook his hand. My fingers were still stained with grease from the morning shift. Across the field, I caught a glimpse of Seraphine. She was standing near the edge, not dressed for photos this time, just a plain blouse and jeans. Her hair was up in a loose ponytail, no makeup that I could see. She clutched her purse tightly, eyes scanning the crowd but not landing anywhere. When our eyes met, she didn't look away. She didn't smile either. She just nodded once, tired, almost grateful, and turned to leave. I didn't call after her, didn't run, didn't chase, didn't gloat. I just watched her walk away, swallowed by the crowd. Later that night, when the picnic was over and Micah was asleep in the truck, I sat on the tailgate and let the breeze cool the sweat on the back of my neck. The lights from the field faded one by one, leaving just the soft hum of insects and the distant echo of laughter. I looked at the logo on the side of the truck, ran my hand across the outline of Grandpa's initials. She wanted me erased, I said aloud to no one in particular. But instead, I became a story this town will never forget. And yet, her fall wasn't finished. It was only beginning, because when pride collapses, it never falls quietly. Word travels fast in a small town, faster when it involves a Carter, and lightning fast when it's the Carter everyone once assumed had it all. I heard about the auction before she did. Seraphine's house, our parents' old home turned suburban estate with white pillars and custom glass doors, was officially foreclosed. The banks were tired of playing games, and the mortgage had gone unpaid for months. Her name had quietly disappeared from the real estate office downtown. I saw the sign come down myself, early one morning while I sipped coffee outside the garage. One guy on a ladder. No fuss, no ceremony, just another chapter closed. It was a Tuesday when I finally saw her again, and by then, the cracks were no longer subtle. She showed up around dusk, walking this time. No SUV, no heels. Her hair pulled back in a messy twist that hadn't seen a brush in a day or two. Clothes wrinkled, face bare, the look of someone who had stopped pretending they were fine, but still hadn't figured out what came next. I was standing outside the garage, closing the hood on a car I'd just finished. Micah was inside, working on his spelling homework, the sound of country music low on the radio behind him. She didn't ask if she could approach. She just stood there, not quite on the gravel, not quite on the sidewalk, in between, always in between. "I don't have anywhere else," she said after a long pause. "I've tried everything. I just need a place, just for a few days, till I figure things out." I didn't respond right away. I wiped my hands on a rag, looked at her, really looked at her. This wasn't the woman who'd mocked me at the will reading, not the one who'd driven past me in a Range Rover while I lived out of a truck. This was someone else now, smaller somehow, but still clinging to the hope that I'd forget. "Please, Sadie," she whispered. "Just let me stay with you. Just for a while." I stepped closer, not out of sympathy, but because I wanted her to hear me clearly. "I gave you silence," I said, "when you tried to erase me. I let you tell your version of everything, paint your picture, and lock me out of it." She lowered her eyes. "But now," I continued, "I give you something better." Her head tilted, uncertain. "I give you freedom, to live without me." I walked past her, opened the garage door, and didn't look back. A few minutes later, when I stepped outside again to lock up for the night, she was gone. The next day, a neighbor told me she'd been seen at the church shelter. A few nights later, someone said she'd asked about a job at the diner on the corner of 5th and Elm. I didn't follow up. I didn't need to. What happened next wasn't about her anymore. It was about what I was still building. The truck, Grandpa's truck, sat in front of the shop, its new paint already a little dusty. The gold trim along the bottom edge caught the morning sun just right. It didn't gleam. It glowed. That Saturday, I woke early, baked muffins with Micah, packed water bottles in the cooler, and filled the truck bed with bags of donated food from the corner grocery. We made 3 stops that morning, one to Miss Dottie on Sycamore Street, one to the Johnson twins whose mom was recovering from surgery, and one to a family I didn't know well, but knew needed help. Every place we stopped, Micah smiled and waved. The truck turned heads, not because it was flashy, but because it had a purpose. We parked outside the town hall around noon. The summer festival was just beginning, booths lining the sidewalk, balloons tied to folding chairs, music played from someone's portable speaker, and the scent of kettle corn and grilled sausage filled the air. Calder met us there with a folding sign he'd made himself. He smiled wide as he set it down beside the truck. Rust to Rise, community truck, free rides, free meals, real talk. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I just gave him a side hug and said, "You really think of everything." Townsfolk gathered. Some asked about the logo on the side. I told them the story, not the full one, not yet, just enough to make them smile and nod. "That's the girl who turned rust into gold," one man said to his wife as he pointed at the truck. I heard her whisper, "Good for her. About time." Micah stood in the back, arms out, balancing like he was on a surfboard. He waved at someone across the lot, his grin wide and proud. I caught my breath for a moment, and in that stillness, I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to admit before. This wasn't about revenge. It never had been. It wasn't even about proving Seraphine wrong. It was about proving Grandpa right. He hadn't left me a rusty truck as a joke or a burden. He'd given me the only thing they couldn't take. A legacy hidden in plain sight. A foundation disguised as scrap. That afternoon, after the festival wrapped and the sun started its slow descent, I walked back to the truck, placed a bouquet of wildflowers in the bed, sunflowers, daisies, and one golden lily, and stood there for a while, watching the petals shift in the breeze. People came and went. Some offered thanks. Some just nodded. One boy walked up, touched the side of the truck gently, and said, "I want to build something like this when I grow up." I knelt down and smiled. "You will. Start small. Start with what everyone else ignores." Later, as twilight dipped the town in purple and gold, I climbed into the driver's seat with Micah by my side. He rested his head on my shoulder, and I brushed a strand of hair from his eyes. "This wasn't just Grandpa's gift," I whispered. "It was his trust. And I finally proved him right." I turned the key. The engine purred like it had always meant to run forever. They tried to bury me in rust, but Grandpa knew there was gold underneath all along. Sometimes, what looks like the smallest inheritance can hold the greatest legacy. Sadie's story reminds us that dignity, resilience, and quiet strength often outlast noise, wealth, and show. Not every revenge story needs to be loud. Sometimes, the most powerful justice is simply rising when no one thought you would. Have you ever been underestimated by your own family? What did you do about it? If this story moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We've got more powerful, real-life inspired stories waiting for you.
Hi, I'm Seren. My sister looked me in the eyes and said, "This table is for family." Then she laughed, as if that seat didn't hold years of silence I'd swallowed to stay in their circle. They thought I'd sit quietly, again, pay the bill, shrink, smile. But that night, something snapped. They had no idea what was coming when I finally said no. Want to know what really happened when I stood up from that chair and didn't sit back down? The exiled seat. I should have said no. I told myself that the entire drive over. With both hands clenched on the steering wheel, I rehearsed a dozen ways to back out. Fake an emergency, pretend I had COVID, claim the car broke down. But I didn't. Because the guilt in my mother's voice wasn't something I could shake off like dust from my coat. So there I was, in front of the Dominion Flame, a steakhouse so upscale even the air smelled smug. I stood outside for a second too long. The late summer heat of Austin hadn't fully settled into evening yet. My palms were already damp, heart tapping like a warning. I could still leave, get back in the car, drive home, pretend I never saw her text. But I didn't. The maitre d' recognized the name and led me in. And there they were, already seated at a long table near the center, under a massive chandelier. I saw my cousin Darian first, his grin spreading like oil across his face. Elira sat next to him, in a white dress a size too small, and a laugh a pitch too high. My mom was sandwiched between two aunts, nodding politely. No one noticed me for a full 3 seconds. Then Darian did. "Look who finally decided to show up," he called out, his voice loud enough to turn heads. "I was starting to think we weren't important enough for her anymore." I forced a smile. "Good evening." I took a step toward an empty chair at the end of the table, trying to sit without making a scene. but Elira's voice sliced in. Uh-uh, she said, shaking her head with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. That seat's for Uncle Leo. You know, family. The word dropped like ice water down my back. Darian leaned forward, pushing his chair slightly, closing off the space. Yeah, we're packed in tonight. You might want to grab something from the other table over there. He gestured behind me without even glancing. It wasn't a joke. The others weren't laughing. My mother looked away. I just stood there. For a second, I forgot how to breathe. I scanned the table, every chair filled with people I used to build pillow forts with, cry in front of, love. And now, not even room for me to sit. My pulse thudded hard in my ears. But I didn't say anything, not yet. I turned, walked toward an empty table, and dragged a chair back across the floor. The screech of metal legs over marble echoed too loudly, but I didn't stop. I set it just beside their table, not quite in, not quite out. Close enough to hear them, too far to be part of them. I sat down, ordered a black coffee, and folded my hands in my lap. My shoulders itched with the weight of every sideways glance in the room. The waiter gave me a curious look. I gave him nothing back. Across from me, Elira raised her glass. To togetherness, she said with a smirk. Some of us value it. They all laughed. Not everyone, but enough. Darian nudged someone and whispered something I didn't catch. I watched the condensation on my glass bead up and run like little escapes. I kept my face unreadable, because if I blinked too long, I'd give myself away. It had always been this way. When we were kids, I was the quiet one, the bookworm, the moody cousin who didn't want to play dress-up or talk about boys. I didn't drink in high school, didn't party in college. I built a life instead. Quietly, carefully, one piece at a time, and they never noticed until they needed something. Now that I'd built a company worth 7 figures and landed in a Forbes local feature, I was suddenly interesting again. But not for who I was, only for what I could give. They didn't say that, of course. No one ever says it out loud. That would be too honest. Instead, they play games like this, like musical chairs with dignity. I watched as they passed bread, laughed at stories, clinked glasses. No one asked me anything. No one cared what I'd been up to. The table might as well have been made of glass, and I was the smudge they refused to wipe clean. Then came the moment that sealed it. Darian made a joke, something about some people forgetting their roots once they have a little cash. And Elira, not missing a beat, threw her head back and laughed. She turned toward me, mid-laugh, eyes locking with mine. And she didn't flinch. She smiled wider. That wasn't laughter. That was a challenge. I sat still. My jaw clenched tight behind a calm expression. I took a sip of my coffee and let it burn on the way down. Better that than letting them see how much it all still hurt. This wasn't awkward. It was war. A plate full of expectations. I didn't flinch. Not on the outside. But inside, I felt something shift. Like a thread pulled too tight, finally starting to snap. Darian's jab, Elira's laugh, that look in her eyes. It was all part of the same script I'd seen before. But this time, I wasn't watching from the wings. They'd shoved me center stage, and I knew my role. The outsider with the wallet. A waiter appeared with a smile that felt rehearsed. Would you all like to see the dinner menus now? Darian sat up straighter and clapped his hands once. Let's do it, I'm starving. Menus were handed out like invitations to a performance. Oversized, leather-bound, designed to impress. Darian opened his dramatically, glancing toward Elira as if they were co-stars in a show only they understood. This place has Wagyu, right? He asked, flipping pages like he already knew the answer. I'll take that, medium rare, and let's do lobster too. He barely paused before shutting the menu with a thud. Oh, and a bottle of that Cabernet we had at Dad's birthday. Elira giggled. You're so predictable. But yeah, get one for the table. My eyes hadn't left my menu. Not because I was reading, but because I didn't want to meet their stares. I already knew what was happening. They hadn't asked me what I wanted. They didn't care. This wasn't about food. It was a declaration of entitlement, of assumption. I was the designated provider, seated on the fringe, yet expected to bankroll the entire fantasy. I glanced up and caught Darian's smirk. "You good with that, Serene?" he asked, voice smooth like he was doing me a favor by including me in the decision. I blinked once. "Sure, sounds festive." He grinned wider. "Knew you'd be cool. You always come through." Elira turned to the others. "We should make tonight count. It's not every day we're all together." Rachel chimed in. "Yeah, and if we're gonna celebrate, we better do it right. Might as well make it memorable." The rest of the table murmured in agreement. One of my uncles chuckled. "Long as someone picks up the check." I froze, just for a second. And then came the kicker. Harlan leaned forward, his voice louder than necessary. "Oh, come on. It's not like Seren can't handle it. She makes more than the rest of us put together." Laughter bubbled up around the table. Not loud, just enough to sting. "That's right," Rachel added. "She's our little tech queen now." "Let her treat us," Elira said, tilting her head like it was the most natural thing in the world. "That's what family's for, right?" My fingers curled slightly under the tablecloth. They weren't even pretending to be subtle anymore. What started as snide remarks had evolved into a full-on group performance. The room was dim, but I could see every glint of satisfaction in their eyes, like they'd rehearsed this and couldn't wait to hit their lines. I could have said something then. I could have called it out. But I didn't. Instead, I gave a half smile and raised my coffee cup like a toast. "To family," I said. They clinked their glasses, celebrating the punchline, not realizing I was rewriting the story in real time. Because I wasn't mad. Not yet. What I felt was precision. They thought they had me pegged, that I'd sit quietly, take the hits, and pay for the pleasure. They had no idea what I was planning. The rest of dinner passed in fragments. Appetizers arrived, crab cakes, truffle fries, foie gras. The conversation blurred, all surface-level chatter, with undercurrents of comparison, judgment, and performance. No one asked about my work. No one mentioned the startup I'd sold. No one said my name unless it followed a joke. I sat there, quietly calculating, watching them pour wine, pass plates, make toasts. They weren't trying to connect. They were trying to impress each other and punish me at the same time. And I let them. Because the more they talked, the more obvious it became. They weren't just trying to make me pay the bill. They were making me earn the right to be here. I heard Rachel laugh again. "Let's not skip dessert. Get the sampler. Seren's got it." Darian raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, let's do 3 of each. Might as well go all in." The waiter nodded, not even checking with me. The assumption was complete. I took a long breath. They thought they were clever. Let them think that. Let them dig the hole. I'd be the one handing them the shovel. The one who never spoke up. I watched them revel in their own performance. Every clink of a glass. Every fake laugh like a metronome keeping time for their manipulation. They thought they were winning. But what they didn't see was me scanning the table. Not for food, not for kindness. I was searching for one face. The only one I'd come here for. My mother. Maeve sat near the middle, her back straight, smile soft, eyes darting to the candles, the ceiling, the waiter. Anywhere but me. I waited for her gaze, a glance, even just the brush of concern. Nothing. She looked past me as if I were a shadow on the wall, like I wasn't even here. And that's when the ache twisted deeper. Not because they were laughing, not because they were greedy, but because the one person who knew better was silent. She always had been. The memory hit hard, so vivid I could almost feel the fabric of my childhood dress again. I was 11. Darian had poured orange soda in my backpack at my own birthday party, said it was because I acted better than everyone. I had run to the kitchen, crying, hands sticky, notebooks ruined. Maeve had pulled me aside, smoothed my hair, and said, "Sweetheart, boys tease the girls they're threatened by. Just let it go. No correction, no defense, No apology for me, just a request to be quiet. And I had listened. Back then, I thought it was strength. Now, I knew better. The plates were being cleared when Elira's voice broke through the hum. "You know what I've noticed?" she said, brushing imaginary crumbs off her lap. "Self-made women are always the coldest. Like they forget how to connect." I didn't look up. I didn't need to. The comment wasn't about women in general. It was about me. Darian laughed, of course. Rachel muttered, "Amen to that." I let the words hang there like smoke. Slowly, I raised my eyes and looked at my mother again. She shifted in her seat. Her lips moved just enough to say, "They didn't mean it like that." I blinked, once. And that was it. She wasn't defending me. She was excusing them, again. She whispered it low, like she didn't want to stir the pot, like my feelings were a disruption to the balance she kept trying to maintain. And in that moment, I felt something crack. Not loud, not messy, just final. There would be no scene, no shouting, but something was leaving me. Something that had tried, for years, to believe this family could change. My fork was still in my hand, but I didn't touch the dessert they'd ordered for the table. I wasn't hungry. I was unraveling. Quietly, intentionally. I drifted back into memory again. Not a moment, but a pattern. The dozens of times my mother had asked me to be the bigger person, to let it slide, to not make things worse. It was always about keeping the peace, even if that peace cost me every piece of myself. I stared into my half-empty coffee, the bitter edge still clinging to the rim. A waiter passed, offering another round of wine. I didn't speak, just raised my hand in a soft decline. I heard them still laughing, heard my name mentioned under someone's breath. I didn't care enough to track who it was. I wasn't sitting at their table. I wasn't even sitting in their reality anymore. In my mind, I began stepping back, not from the table, not from the room, but from the expectations that had caged me my entire life. For the first time in years, I saw Maeve not as mom, but as a woman who had chosen silence, again and again. And no matter how much I'd wanted her protection, I could no longer excuse her absence just because she came wrapped in motherhood. They joked, they drank, they piled desserts into each other's plates, and I sat still, letting the numbness wash in. Not to escape, but to prepare. Because while they laughed, I was changing. While they circled the same game, I was stepping off the board. And when I looked at my mother one last time, her eyes finally found mine. She blinked, startled, like she hadn't expected me to still be watching. I didn't smile. I didn't flinch. She chose silence again. And now, I choose something else. The mask and the ultimatum. I didn't say a word. Just held my mother's gaze long enough for her to understand. I wasn't waiting anymore. The silence between us stretched for maybe 2 seconds. Then I stood and quietly excused myself, stepping away from the table as naturally as I could. I made my way to the lounge area off the main dining floor, where the lights were lower, the music softer, and the illusion of peace a little more believable. It wasn't about needing air, it was about not suffocating. I sat near a tall window facing Congress Avenue. The view was blurred by the reflection of the chandelier behind me. People passed by outside, free and unaware. For a brief second, I envied their anonymity. Footsteps approached. I didn't look up. I already knew. "Hey," Darian said, voice smooth like always. "You okay?" I didn't answer. He took the liberty of sitting across from me like we were old friends catching up over drinks. "You know how they are," he began, tone casual. Loud, dumb, a little tactless, but harmless. I kept my eyes on the street. He waited a beat, then leaned in. "Look," he said, lowering his voice. "Between you and me, this whole dinner, it wasn't just about catching up. You probably figured that out already. No kidding. But here's the thing," he continued, flashing that tired charm he used on women and investors alike. "You showing up tonight? That meant a lot. To Mom, to the family. They were never going to say it, of course, They're all too proud for that. But they notice, especially after, well, the Forbes piece. There it was. He gave me a tight-lipped smile. You've done well for yourself, Saran. We all see it. I said nothing. And tonight? It's just a dinner. One bill. It's not about the money. It's about the gesture. He smiled like he'd just solved world peace. You pay, we laugh, we drink. We toast to you. Everyone walks away feeling good. Win-win. I turned to face him fully. You mean, I pay, and they feel good? He blinked, but the smile didn't falter. Semantics. I leaned back in the chair. So that's the plan, huh? Hand me the script and hope I play along. He chuckled, low. Come on, Saran. Don't turn this into some kind of protest. It's family. We razz each other. We lean in. We cover when someone can't. We're all adults. You're not gonna let a couple offhand jokes ruin the night, are you? That word again. Family. Funny how it was always weaponized when they wanted something. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shift in my seat. I'm not here to ruin anything, I said evenly. But I'm also not here to fund a show I wasn't cast in. He exhaled sharply, eyes narrowing just a little. Okay, he said, dropping the smile. If that's how you feel. There it was, the pivot. The moment charm slid into pressure. But just know, he continued, if you don't step up here, it won't go unnoticed. I stared at him. Is that a threat? I asked. No, he said too quickly. It's just reality. This family talks, always has. You know how Mom is? You know how the others are. I'm trying to protect you, honestly. From the narrative, the narrative. If you refuse to do something this small, he added, it gives them permission to say a lot worse. That was the moment I realized. He wasn't here to talk. He was here to control the fallout. I smiled, slow and careful. You don't get to build a fire under me, I said, and then ask why I'm sweating. He sat back like I'd slapped him. I leaned forward slightly. And if you think I'm the kind of woman who pays hush money in the form of cheesecake and lobster, you're not nearly as smart as you think. He blinked. For the first time all night, Darian actually blinked. Then he glanced away, adjusting his shirt collar like it had suddenly gotten tight. I'm trying to keep things from getting messy, he muttered. They already are, I said softly, but not because of me. He stood, hands on his hips, looking like he wanted to say more. Instead, he nodded once, sharper than necessary, and walked back to the table. From where I sat, I could see his shoulders tense. He rejoined the others with a forced laugh, and some comment I didn't catch. I saw Elira turn toward him, her smile faltering. Maeve reached for her glass. Something was different. I hadn't won. But I'd broken the script. When even love isn't enough. I stayed in the lounge long after Darian returned to the table. The air felt heavier now. The distant clatter of forks and fake laughter didn't reach me the same way anymore. I was untethered from them, like a balloon they let go, expecting it to come drifting back. But I wasn't floating. I was watching. That's when my phone buzzed. I glanced down. It was her. Mom, calling. For a second, I just stared at the screen. My finger hovered over the green button, then pulled away. I let it ring twice more before I answered. Serene! Her voice cracked softly, barely louder than a whisper. Sweetheart, are you okay? My throat tightened. She sounded like she used to, on those rare nights when I had the flu, or after Dad left and I cried into her lap. She sounded like the mom I used to believe could fix anything. I know tonight was hard, she said, pausing. They can be a lot, but they're not bad people. They just don't always know how to handle your success. You've always been strong, stronger than them. I leaned back in the chair, eyes on the ceiling now. Is that what this is? I asked quietly. Me being punished for doing well? No, she said quickly. Don't twist my words, baby. I'm saying, you're not like them. You've got the backbone. That's why I knew you'd handle this better than they would. She meant it as a compliment, but all I heard was surrender. She was asking me to carry the weight again, wrap it up, swallow it down, and be the better person. Still, for a moment, I let myself believe her. Maybe she really was trying. Maybe this was her way of saying she saw me now, not as an ATM or a black sheep, but as her daughter. Maybe. After the call ended, I didn't move. I just stared at the dim chandelier above me, the light fracturing slightly through a small crack in the glass. Like everything beautiful in this family, it was polished, but broken. By the time I got home, it was past midnight. I didn't even bother turning on the lights. I set my phone on the kitchen counter and poured myself water, my mind replaying her words again and again. "You've always been strong. That's why I knew you'd handle it." She hadn't apologized. She hadn't acknowledged her silence. But she'd called. And that had meant something, hadn't it? I went to bed thinking maybe I'd call her back in the morning. Maybe I'd invite her over. Maybe we could start from a quieter place. But morning had its own plans. My phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a call. It was a message. "Mom. Saran, don't make this about you. Think of the family's name. Just help them out this once." That was it. One sentence. And every fragile piece of hope I had been clinging to shattered with it. Not because she asked for help, but because she said, "Don't make this about you." As if I was being dramatic. As if their cruelty, their laughter, their constant belittling was just a moment I had blown out of proportion. She didn't call to mend anything. She called to soften me up. The tears didn't come right away. Not out of pride. There was just nothing left in the tank. My chest was heavy, but my eyes stayed dry. I opened the message, read it twice, then slowly typed my response. "I'm not your scapegoat, not anymore." I hit send. No punctuation, no room for misreading. I set the phone down, stepped away from the kitchen and into the hallway, each footstep quieter than the last. The emotional cord had snapped, not with a scream, but with a silence I no longer feared. I was done asking to be understood. Now I would make myself clear. Smile for the camera, I had made myself clear. At least, I thought I had. But clarity doesn't mean people will listen. It just means they'll find a new way to pretend they didn't hear you. I was still in the hallway, leaning against the cool wall, when my phone lit up again. A new text. "Elira. Hey, I just wanted to say I'm really sorry if tonight felt weird. I know things got awkward. I still love you. You know that, right?" No punctuation at the end. No ownership of what she'd done. Just vague softness wrapped in sugar, and wrapped again in self-preservation. I stared at the screen for a moment, letting the message sit there like a cheap peace offering. Weird. That's what she called it. I didn't reply. Not yet. Something about it didn't sit right. The tone was off. Too polished. Too rehearsed. I locked my phone and stood up straight, already planning to leave. But curiosity got the better of me, and as I walked slowly back toward the dining area, I opened Instagram. A notification popped up. Elira.Ray tagged you in a story. I tapped it. It was a boomerang clip, one of those cheerful little loops. The table, laughing, glasses raised, everyone smiling like it was the best night of their lives. Caption: "Family over everything." I looked closer. The video had been taken earlier, just before dessert. I remembered that moment, because it was the exact second I'd gotten up to leave for the lounge. I was in the frame, kind of. You could see my elbow, half my shoulder, cut right at the edge. Like an afterthought, someone forgot to crop properly. She'd tagged me, but carefully angled the video to crop me out visually. I was there, but I wasn't. It was surgical. A curated illusion. That was never an apology. It was a setup. Text me sweetly, post me silently. It wasn't reconciliation. It was branding. I was being used as a prop in a narrative where they looked like the inclusive, loving, messy but adorable family. And I was just the blurry ghost who never fit in frame. I took a breath. It didn't steady me, it only stoked the fire. No more backing down. No more be the bigger person. I wasn't interested in size. I was interested in truth. I walked back to the table slowly, with a calm they didn't recognize on my face. Elira noticed me first. Her expression tightened just a fraction before she replaced it with a smile. That same stage smile I'd seen since we were kids. The cameras on, behave smile. She opened her mouth to speak. I didn't give her the chance. "If anyone here thinks I'm just here for your highlight reel," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, but not loud enough to startle. "Let me make this very clear." I pulled out my own phone, held up her Instagram post. "I am not your accessory." Her mouth opened, but I didn't stop. "You want me cropped out of your life? Do it honestly. Don't tag me for optics. Don't pretend you reached out when all you did was hide your insult behind a filter." Maeve whispered my name, like she was trying to calm a dog. Darian leaned forward. "Serene, don't do this here." "Oh?" I turned to him. "Where should I do it, Darian?" "At your next wine tasting? Or maybe during the next group text where you all pretend I'm too tense to be invited?" No one said anything. I'm done playing quiet. I'm done making everyone comfortable while I bleed under the table. I sat down, slowly, in the chair I had dragged earlier. Not a full seat at the table, just close enough to remind them I'd never really left. The silence that followed felt deeper than anything anyone had said all night. Elira stared at her phone like it had betrayed her. Darian's jaw clenched. Maeve looked down, twisting her napkin into knots. And I didn't flinch. I wasn't background anymore. I was about to become the plot twist. This bill comes with a receipt. Not with screaming, not with a grand gesture, but with the kind of stillness that makes people nervous. The waiter returned, holding the leather-bound check holder like it was a crown waiting to be placed. He didn't hesitate, didn't glance around the table. He placed it directly in front of me. It landed like a gavel. For a beat, no one said anything. Then, Darian broke the silence, his tone all smug nonchalance. "You got this, right?" he said, stretching his arms behind his head. "It's nothing for you." There it was, the trap, the moment they'd all been circling toward like vultures dressed in designer labels. I let my hand rest on the bill, didn't open it right away. I just looked around. Their expressions flickered. Rachel, with her perfected Instagram smile. Elira adjusting her napkin like she wasn't staring. My mother still looking down. Her glass now just a stem, clutched in trembling fingers. Then I opened it. $3,247. Wagyu, lobster, truffles, vintage wine, double desserts, and not a single thing I had ordered. I inhaled once, slow and shallow, then exhaled through my nose. They thought silence meant surrender. They forgot silence can be strategic. I closed the bill, slow and deliberate. Then I reached across the table and slid it gently in front of Darian. I didn't say anything, not yet. He blinked down at it, confusion flickering for half a second before his face tightened. "What's this?" he asked, though we both knew the answer. I finally spoke. "Oh, you thought I was covering this. That's cute." His jaw clenched. "You're serious?" he said, voice low. Elira leaned forward, eyes sharp. "Come on, Seren. This isn't the time for theatrics." Rachel added, "Yeah, we all agreed this was kind of your night. You were the one who said, 'to family,' remember?" "That was before you cropped me out of your family photo," I said without flinching. Rachel looked away. Elira straightened her back. "Fine," she snapped. "We'll split it. 3 ways, but not with her. She's not family." Her voice cracked just enough on the word family to draw attention from the next table over. People turned. The energy shifted. For once, their quiet rejection wasn't behind closed doors or buried in sarcasm. It was loud, ugly, public, and the restaurant noticed. Forks stopped clinking. Chatter slowed. Someone at another table whispered, "What the hell's going on?" I stood up, slow, calm. I looked down at Illyra, then at Darian, then finally at my mother, who still couldn't meet my eyes. "You keep calling me not family," I said. "Let me make it easier." I took one step back from the table. "You're right." Nobody breathed. "I don't belong here, not because I changed, but because I outgrew the script." Maeve looked up, lips parted like she was about to say my name, but I shook my head before she could. "You wanted me to sit quietly and pay for the privilege of being mistreated," I continued. "That was never family. That was theater." Darian muttered, "Don't make this dramatic." I turned toward him. "It's not drama. It's a receipt. You cashed in on me for years. This is just your balance due." And with that, I turned and walked away from the table, again. But this time, I wasn't retreating. I was leaving on purpose. I could feel their eyes on my back, the silence behind me louder than any insult they could throw. I didn't owe them noise, just distance. Family ends where dignity begins. They said I wasn't family. I finally believed them. I kept walking, but only a few steps, just enough to let the silence hang, just enough to give them time to realize what had really happened. The room around us hadn't moved, but something in the air had shifted, something final. There was no more chatter, no more clinking glasses or fake toasts. I turned slowly, one last time, and looked at the table. Nobody was smiling now. Darian's smirk was gone, replaced by that tight-lipped look he used when deals slipped through his fingers. "You're really going to do this?" he muttered, like I'd just embarrassed him at a board meeting. Illyra's hand twitched on her wine glass. She glanced at the people around us. For once, she looked worried about how this might play. Not on Instagram, but in real life. No one backed her up. Rachel looked down, chewing her lip like she wanted to disappear. Velda had gone pale. And Maeve just sat there, frozen, still clutching her napkin like it could save her from the truth. They didn't expect me to call their bluff. I walked slowly to the end of the table, not rushing, not storming, just moving with the kind of clarity that doesn't leave room for interpretation. "You all sat here," I said, voice steady, "and decided I didn't belong." My eyes swept over the table. Darian flinched. "But what none of you ever asked was, do I want to?" That landed. I turned to Maeve, fully now. Her shoulders looked smaller than I remembered. "You knew," I said. "You knew they were setting this up, and you let them." Her mouth opened, then closed. A single tear rolled down her cheek. "You didn't have to defend me. But you could have noticed me." Still nothing. From the side, Velda whispered, "We don't air family drama in public." I glanced at her without moving my head. "You should have thought of that before posting fake apologies and cutting me out of family photos." She shut up fast. Harlan muttered something under his breath, but it didn't matter. His glare was familiar, toothless. The collapse wasn't loud. It was quieter than I imagined. A soft implosion of years of expectations finally folding under their own weight. And maybe that's what made it hit harder. I reached into my purse and pulled out $100 bill, clean, crisp, tucked between my ID and a stick of gum. I walked to the center of the table and laid it down. "This should cover the coffee," I said, "and my seat." I paused, letting the sentence finish itself. Then I turned toward the exit. My heels clicked against the floor, each step louder than their silence. I didn't rush, didn't flinch, just walked, steady and whole. And then, just as I pushed the door open, I heard it. "Sarin!" Maeve's voice. Software. Breaking. But I didn't stop walking. Because sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes what you need more than love is air, and space, and the dignity of knowing you finally chose yourself. The silence that heals. I never looked back, but I heard my name. And this time, I didn't stop walking. 2 days later, I woke up in my apartment, wrapped in a kind of stillness that didn't ache. There were no missed calls, no texts, no new voicemails, No digital breadcrumbs leading back to that table. Just me, the soft hum of the air conditioning, and the late morning sun filtering through half-closed blinds. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I wasn't bracing for the next thing, the next jab, the next demand, the next guilt-laced, "I just need a little favor." The silence didn't feel empty, it felt earned. I sat up slowly. My body wasn't sore, but something deeper inside me felt reset, like I had crossed a bridge and burned it behind me, not in rage, but in necessity. Mid-afternoon, my phone buzzed once. A voice message. Maeve. I hesitated. My thumb hovered over the play button for a full minute before I tapped it. Her voice was softer than I expected. Tired. Cracked around the edges. Serene, I don't expect you to forgive me, and I'm not going to pretend I didn't make it worse. There was a pause, the sound of her breath hitching. I know they were wrong. I know I should have said something. I was scared. That's not an excuse, but if you never come back, I still love you. Click. No follow-up, no second message, just that. I didn't cry because I was broken. I cried because, for once, someone in that family didn't ask me for something. She just left the door open, quietly. I played the message again, then set the phone down, and didn't reply. Not out of anger, out of clarity. Some wounds heal with time. Others become part of the skin, like a scar you stop noticing until someone touches it. Later that night, I opened my laptop. My startup's dashboard lit up with numbers, graphs, real momentum. The work I'd built without a single favor. Every email, every investor pitch, every long night of questioning if it would all fall apart. And yet, here it was. Alive. Growing. I met my own eyes in the reflection of the screen. I didn't lose them, I whispered. I found myself. I closed the laptop and stood, walking to the kitchen where I poured a glass of wine and opened the balcony door. Austin's skyline stretched out in front of me, quiet, glowing, unaware of my family's theatrics. The kind of city that lets you disappear and reappear entirely on your own terms. Just as I took the first sip, my phone buzzed again. A message from Elira. A photo. The rest of them gathered around Maeve's backyard fire pit, smiling, toasting marshmallows. The caption read, "Real ones only, family first." I didn't open it, didn't zoom in to see who else was there. I placed the phone face down on the counter. I poured a little more wine, then walked back to the balcony and leaned against the railing. The city didn't ask me to smile. It didn't require an explanation. It just let me breathe. You can still love someone and still leave. Maybe you've been there, at a table where everyone smiles like nothing's wrong, while you sit there wondering how you became the outsider in your own family. I've been there too. And walking away wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I didn't leave out of anger. I left to protect my peace. Because family doesn't mean tolerating disrespect. Loyalty shouldn't come at the cost of your identity. It took me years to understand. You can love someone and still choose distance. You can set boundaries without guilt. And silence, when it comes from strength, not fear, is powerful. If this story hit close to home, drop a 1 in the comments, or let me know where you're watching from. If it didn't, that's okay. Tell me why. Your voice matters here. And if this message meant something to you, hit that subscribe button. There's more truth-telling to come, and I'm glad you're here for it.